Rudimentary. When you woke up this morning, did you purposely say, I'm going to confine myself to a box? Or do you just avoid putting any conscious thought into today? When you're busy going at it, literally or figuratively, do you ever find yourself pausing for a moment to realize what's going on? Or are you just reacting? When you hear the saying, "May I have your attention, please," do you continue as you were, or do you consider the information you're about to receive might actually be valuable? When I was growing up, my mother used to ask me to do things, and sometimes her reasoning was, because I said so. Looking back, I wish perhaps I took the time to pause, think, and consider the ramifications of my choices. Good Friday to you. Today is Friday, September 30th, 2016. This is episode number 15 of Pause, Think, Consider. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in and been listening with us. If you haven't checked out the website, pausethinkconsider.com, please go on. We have daily questions that go with each episode and would sincerely appreciate you engaging, commenting, giving your perspective. Very different from the engagement we have on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube. Our goal is to have each channel unique so that you can pick one that correlates and represents you best. So please check out the website pausethinkconsider.com and see if perhaps those questions are engaging and helps you take an extra moment to pause, think, and consider. Today's topic is on being an influencer and the concept of influencing despite the level or status that you currently are. There's a perception that I personally have, one that is almost a catch-22. And it goes right along with not only the job market, but with leadership, with management, and with being an influencer. And that concept is that you have to have experience in order to get experience. This has been an ongoing challenge that I have had throughout my career. And as I've tried to go up level to level to level within my career, it's always been a catch-22. There's always been the questions of, well, you don't have enough experience. In order to get to this particular position, you need to have X years, or you need to have this certain type of experience. And my question is always, well, how am I supposed to obtain that level of experience if I'm not given the opportunity to have that experience? How am I supposed to become a leader if I'm not given the opportunity to lead? How can I expect to be a manager if I'm not allowed to manage? And well, I know I've personally had challenges with this, and it's been a struggle since I can ever remember, particularly going back to high school and throughout my career, in college, through my internships. It's everywhere. And yet, as I've continued to go through these steps, I've come to the realization that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what level you're at. It doesn't matter if you're physically given that management position. It doesn't matter what the status or social norms say in terms of where you're supposed to fall in line. It doesn't matter because ultimately, we follow and we love to be guided by people regardless of where their status is, where they are on the totem pole. We all actively seek and gravitate towards leaders, even leaders themselves. Even leaders themselves within their own circle want other leaders as examples, as people that can help guide them, that can give them the examples that they need to be a better leader themselves. We all seek influencers. And the idea that you have to be at a particular level is complete nonsense. What we look for and how you can develop this influence, this leadership quality, is through action. It doesn't necessarily take having status or take having the soapbox with 20,000 followers or 100,000 unique visitors to your site or 500 subscribers. It takes one. And that one is you. It takes yourself by getting up and off your ass and starting. As I described before, having this personal perception that it takes experience to get experience. I have this activity group that I'm a part of. And if we're looking on the totem pole in my particular region, on the totem pole, I'd estimate I'm halfway between the top and the middle. So about 3/4 of the way is where I probably fall if I'm using some truth serum. In my region, I'm towards the top. I'm not at the top. I don't want to get into particular numbers and saying I'm in the top 5 or I'm in the top 3 or I'm in the top 10. But I'm in the top echelon within my local community. And yet, not only in my local community, but within my region, despite knowing clearly where I fall, the impact that I've been able to have is one in which I'm personally not aware of until other individuals point out to me. And I've had these conversations with others that I have this perception that I can't have the impact that I want to have. That if I can get to the top, if I can be in the top 10, at the forefront of being a leader, the number one guy within the region, that is when I will be able to have the greatest impact. That is when people will finally start to listen to me. But what I've discovered through the vision and the awareness that the rest of my circle has pointed out to me is that despite not being at the top, it's the consistency, it's the conviction, it's the passion, it's the confidence that is displayed, which allows other individuals to buy in, which creates the followers, which creates and lays the leadership groundwork. So I want to talk about, for those that desire to be a leader, those that have an idea, that believe there's a better way, yet struggle with being able to make the change, which are seeking other individuals because of their leadership position within the community, within your industry, relying on them. And I am here to say, as a call to bear arms, if you will, that it's not necessary. It's not necessary. You can have the impact that you want to. How that can be accomplished? How that can be accomplished starts by physically making those steps forward yourself. As I said before, in my personal example, that the confidence, the conviction, the consistency are all things that has led to me having an impact, despite the fact of not being that perceived leader, that perception that I personally have of myself. But it starts with physically making the choice to lead. Physically having the courage to speak up. It's a challenge. Socially, it's much easier to just fall in line. Socially, it's much less difficult. We run into far less barriers by being a follower. We go through less negativity by being a listener rather than a doer. And yet, realistically, holding yourself back and listening isn't always in the best interest. If you have within your heart an altruistic motive for bettering your industry, for bettering your company, for bettering your family, the only way that's going to happen is by you physically taking those steps forward. The communicating to another leader isn't always necessarily what's going to bring to success. And to give you an example, to use the example of this activity group I'm a part of. This was several years ago, many years ago. I came to the realization that my local community didn't have an active leader. It didn't have somebody that was trying to bring the collective group together and to improve everyone, to disseminate the information necessary to grow and nurture and cultivate our group. And it bothered me. I can remember going to the leader of our community, the number one guy, and talking about my disappointment, and talking about how much I wish, in compared to other local areas, that we had what they had. My perception was that they were superior to us. But they weren't doing anything that was rocket science. They weren't doing anything that was even difficult or challenging. They were just doing. And as a result of them doing, perception-wise, and maybe even in reality, they were at a higher level collectively than our local area was. So I had this internal struggle. I knew where I fell on the totem pole. At the time, I was very much down the totem pole. I wasn't at the very, very bottom, but I wasn't even close to the midway point. Not only from an experience standpoint, but from an influencer standpoint, my name, my ideas, my concepts were irrelevant, especially when you added in the experience level that I brought to the table. So I struggled because I knew what had to be done. I knew the actions and the steps that had to be taken. I knew despite where I was at in the hierarchy, that something needed to be done. We talked yesterday about the leap of faith. This would be another great example of the leap of faith. I look back now and looking at the moment, at the decision to do something, and it was very much a leap of faith. It was one that I had simply grown tired of the fact that we weren't doing anything. And almost to the point of being blinded by the fact that no one was doing anything is what gave me the courage to step forward. To use a sports analogy, in basketball, when you look at the NCAA tournament, there's often comparisons of a senior-laden team compared to a freshman-laden team. The comparison that's often made is the senior-laden team has more experience, and because of that experience, are more prepared to deal with the challenges and the adversity that is faced during the NCAA tournament. And yet, every year, there's a team, sometimes even a particular individual, that propels their school on to the next round, on to the next game, despite whatever the odds makers say, and despite whatever the media or critics say. And it's often referred to as these freshmen, these inexperienced individuals. They simply don't know. They're not aware of the fact that they're not supposed to win. They don't have the awareness that in going up against the perennial powerhouse, the favorite in the entire tournament, that they are supposed to lose by 50, 60 points. They're not aware of that. And they simply go out without a care in the world and just simply do their best. Despite all of that, at times, the experience prevails. Because of just that, the experience. But there is always an occurrence in which that experience, the senior-laden team, lulls themselves into a false perception, into a false sense of security that they're just going to steamroll this other team. And the other team, they don't even realize that that's supposed to happen. They're simply in the moment and just playing their best and believe with conviction that they have a shot. And that's the exact same mentality that I took. While I had self-awareness to the point that I realized somebody else should be taking these actions forward, I knew someone had to take them. And despite my lack of experience overall, in comparison to the rest of the group, I had enough experience to realize that no one else was doing anything. And so I took that step forward. And initially, there was a little bit of pushback. There was less buy-in than maybe I had hoped for. There was even some murmurs of, why is Jesse doing this? Why is he the messenger? Why is he the one standing up, making it known and disseminating the information? But that only lasted for so many years. It only lasted for so many years because by taking those actions, the number one person in our community latched on and realized that it was necessary. And when we came to talk, it wasn't necessarily that he didn't believe it should have been done, but he didn't necessarily want to make all the effort all on his own to do the actions that were necessary. And as a highly motivated individual that had the ability to effectively communicate and effectively distribute the information, he latched onto that because he knew that I had the ability to clearly, concisely, and most importantly, effectively distribute what was necessary to the group. And in that moment, when the number one person latched on and started giving me the necessary content to distribute, the credibility of myself went through the roof. And suddenly, almost seemingly overnight, I became an influencer. I became a main distributor. Despite being below average on the hierarchy, it instantly increased my credibility to above average. And with each passing year, with each consistent, concentrated year of producing and distributing the message, it became more and more prevalent. It became necessary for all individuals to recognize and to implement, because it wasn't about me anymore. It was about the message. I just happened to be the messenger. I just happened to be the individual that took the courage and said, I will be the torchbearer. I don't know how to light the torch. I don't know how to hold the torch. But I'm going to go find it. I'm going to pick it up. And I'm going to find some way to light it. And then I'm going to hold it for all others to follow. And as a result, now, today, within our community, we have one of the strongest groups, to the point that the rival or other communities within our region were at the same, if not a higher level. And I've gained more experience. I have increased experience. And as a result of that, because of the consistency, because of 5, 6, 7, 8 years of being at the forefront, of being the messenger, it has brought on increased credibility to my message. I still leverage and I still utilize that number one person in the community because we're a team and he has the information. Now it has become less about who is distributing the information. We now have other people who are distributing. We have other people that are bearing the torch, that have, since I decided to step forward, that are helping the group, which has helped bring additional people from the bottom up, strengthening the entire group. So when you look at the concept of you need experience to gain experience, it's simply a matter of choosing to step forward, having that courage, knowing that despite what society says where you should fall in place, if you are willing to move forward, then others are willing to follow. With that, there's also the idea that even though you may be the torchbearer, that even though you may be an influencer, that to have the greatest impact that you possibly can be, sometimes it's about getting to the level that you can have the greatest impact. So, to give you an analogy, there's the perception that to have the biggest impact and to be the greatest influencer, you need to be at the top. And there's several different ways and a lot of different leadership analogies, a lot of different leadership perspectives. There's the one of leading from top down. There's the one of leading from bottom up. And then there's the leadership style of leading from person to person. It's my personal belief that sometimes, in order to move forward, in order to have the greatest impact, despite the perception being that the top is always going to have the greatest influence, that they're going to be able to get the ears and recognition and to have that soapbox, that sometimes the key or the sweet spot, if you will, in having the greatest impact is actually at a lower level. The analogy that I would use is within the agency world. Oftentimes, the agency world gets a bad rep, particularly for the millennial generation. I mentioned before that millennials, on average, change careers every 2.5 years. In the agency world, it seems to be even less. I have seen individuals that are within my circle on LinkedIn that anywhere between 6 to 9 months, every 6 to 9 months, and these are not contract or freelance workers, these are full-time positions. These are full-time individuals that every 6 to 9 months they are changing organizations, not just positions. This isn't going from a junior to a senior, from a designer to a creative director, from a sales representative to an account manager. This is staying within the same division and moving on to a different company every 6 to 9 months. So in a span of 10 years, looking at that individual's experience, you're going to see anywhere from 10 to 20 different companies. And then each company has success metrics. I find myself, when looking at those individuals and looking at those success metrics, having a hard time buying into them. Partially because of my own experience in knowing that it can take me 6 to 12 months just to understand my job, just to understand the company that I'm a part of. And while I know at past companies, their expectations was in 3 months to get completely spun up, or in 1 month to have a complete understanding of all accounts, perhaps other individuals have that ability. Perhaps the individuals that every 6 months are switching companies, they are at an efficiency standpoint in which they can learn the total business, they can learn all the accounts, they can learn their job, and they can learn how to be proficient and effective within that position in a 40-hour work week or less. Those are people I need in my circle. I have not encountered people like that. I'm not even sure that they exist. They're like a unicorn to me. Mythical in the sense that I don't know how that is possible. Yet, there's individuals that tout that that is what they are able to do. That in a 6-month tenure, they were able to increase ROI by 10%. They were able to decrease the total cost by 25%. I suppose, in the sense of framing data and framing statistics, that you can do it in any manner that positively affects and positively impacts you. If I'm looking at one day compared to another day, if I had 2 people listen to this podcast and then tomorrow 4 people listen, it's a huge increase. And if I just extract the data from looking at that 2-day span, and that is what I use as the representation of my success metric, I don't want to say that it's slanderous because it is truthful. I just don't think it's being transparent. When I see success metrics, I always like to have the timeline behind them. I want to know what the totals were. How great of an impact that was. To really get the sense of when you say, I increased the ROI by 10%. Perhaps 6 months prior to you, the site or the campaign didn't even exist. It didn't even exist. And then you came in, did really best practices, the basics that would increase results automatically. That's like saying the first week, if I was going to compare week 0 to week 1 of Pause, Think, Consider and the number of viewers, it's something like a 250% increase. It sounds really impressive. Here's the reality. It was from 0 to whatever the number was. So having that timeline and having that baseline metric to understand the growth is important. So when I see individuals that change from position to position to position, and it's within the same field, it's within the same position, not going up, not changing direction, it's just a different company, I scratch my head because I wonder, what impact are they having? I wonder, are they able to be the influencer? Are they able to get the power that they're looking for? I don't know that that particular individual is, but I do know that each organization is different. And sometimes, in order to have the greatest impact, you have to have a step backwards. In order to step forward, you need to take a step backwards. It could be from a culture standpoint. From a culture standpoint, that the organization that you're currently at is not as open-minded, does not have the ability for somebody at your particular level to have the impact that you want to have. I know in particular in the Portland market right now, the startup community is exploding. It's the hot market right now. And it's incredibly popular with the millennial community because they believe they can have an impact. And when you're early on in your career, when the mantra of you need experience in order to get experience, the best way to get experience is one of two ways. You can either go the route of going to a massive company like a Nike, like an Intel, like a Tektronix, where there's thousands of employees, and then work your way up, around, and sideways through the organization, learning from as many different groups and as many individuals as possible. And it will be encouraged from a culture standpoint from you to learn from any and everyone, because they want to keep you within the box. They want to keep you under the umbrella. And so long as you are still under the umbrella, but you are learning, then you are an asset to them. However, in a smaller company, the impact that you can have is even greater. When the marketing department is of one individual, and that one individual is you, your ability to learn, nurture, and grow is going to be much greater than initially starting in a company of Nike's size. That's not to say that you won't have the ability at some point to have that impact. At some point to contribute to the culture and the bottom line in the same manner as you being the only individual within that organization. But starting out, it's comparing apples to oranges. And so when I look at individuals that make multiple changes, that are constantly moving around, I'm not sure of their decision-making process in doing so. But I have noticed that each organization is different. And particularly ones that have a culture that empower their employees, that plead with them, almost pleading with them, to think outside the box, to bring any and every idea, that no idea is a bad one. Those are the organizations that you can be an influencer despite what level you're at. You read about and you hear about organizations that say everyone from the janitor to the CEO has an impact. If you're not familiar with Zappos, in particular the book that Tony Hsieh wrote, which I will link to on the website, it's a remarkable story. Remarkable in the sense of he's always changing and always adapting. And it really changed my perception. It really helped shift my mentality that I could have a greater impact despite where I was on the hierarchy. The whole concept of meritocracy and having a flat managed and flat hierarchy just blew my mind. And while a company doesn't necessarily have to have the same principles or the same structure or the same management style, sometimes it requires going down the level to have a greater impact. Sometimes being in a non-leadership position allows you to be a greater influence. If you've ever seen the show Undercover Boss, not a TV watcher, but I am familiar with the show and with the concept. It's the CEO, the CFO, a high-standing executive level person within a large organization, large to the point that while they dress up, potentially having a mask on, different hair, clothes to disguise themselves, they go to the working people class and participate. And these episodes are so impactful because not only does it give the executive leader a perspective that they had not previously had. And I've always heard when C-level employees come down, when it's a top-down leadership organization, not an employee-owned leadership, which is far different, but a top-down leadership mentality, that when the executives take the time and have the willingness to open their ears and listen and pause, think, and consider what it is that each individual has to say, regardless of their level, that is when organizations are able to move forward. And so if you find yourself in a position within your organization, within your community, maybe even within your family, that you're currently positioned and cannot have the influence that you want to make, perhaps you need to go down rather than fighting and clawing to go up. That's why grassroots movements are so impactful. Individuals that aren't in a leadership position, They're not in government. They're not the mayor, the governor, the senator, the president. And yet, these individuals who, so describe the first step of just taking that step forward, having that courage to completely disregard the social hierarchy by stepping forward, taking themselves outside of fighting for that leadership position and just going forward, they're able to have an impact at times that rivals anything somebody in a higher leadership, a governmental position, is able to have. And socially, it makes you scratch your head. How on earth is it possible for somebody with a nonprofit, self-created organization able to have a greater impact than the government? It's because they're able to get buy-in. They're able to create something in which people are willing to follow. They believe in the message. It resonates with them far more than the leader. These individuals are able to connect on a personal level that someone at a higher level simply doesn't have the perspective in order to do so. That's why the higher you go within your organization, the more important it is for you to gain and have that consistent perspective from the bottom up. Without that perspective, your ability to lead and your ability, more importantly, to have influence is greatly impacted. That's why you hear from organizations and their incredible stories where an individual started out as an account rep or a cold call sales representative and eventually becomes the CEO. My personal belief is because that person was able to have an influence, was able to have an impact at their particular level that was unmatched by anyone else above them. And to move the organization forward, it was in the best interest of the overall company, of the overall organization, of the overall cause, to put that person in a leadership position. Not that they weren't already in a leadership position, but when you have those followers, when you have that influence, and then you are suddenly given the soapbox, it enables you to have an exponential impact. Now, there are individuals that lose sight of this potential impact. They have worked their entire lives sometimes to get to this level. And the focus initially was on having an impact, regardless of what level they get to. But they get blinded by the success. They get blinded by the fact that they have reached the pinnacle. And they often lose focus on what the goal was when they originally started. Which is why having those individuals that you trust, having those perspectives from people at this time now below you is most important. To allow you and remind you of what you came from. To remind you of what the goal is, what your higher purpose is. And I see individuals struggle all the time. And it's so disappointing. It's sad to see somebody that fought for so long, that put in so much time and effort to claw their way and implore to their followers that they would not get a big head, that success would not cloud them from the overall impact that they wanted to have. And yet, it sometimes takes a coming to Jesus moment to realize how they've lost their way. Regardless of where you reach, regardless of the level that you're able to obtain, having those individuals both above and below you to keep you focused is one of the most important things you can do in being an influencer. So in recap, we talked about having an influence and having an impact. That the first step is simply moving forward, where the social hierarchy may tell you that you lie, regardless of how close you are to the pinnacle or how close you are to the bottom. Socially, it doesn't matter. What matters is taking action. What matters is having the courage to step forward, because it was others previously to you that had the courage to move forward, that enabled them to be in the position that you now believe in, that you now look up to. And if there isn't a leader within your community, there isn't a leader within your group, you can use examples from other organizations, from other areas, to help give you the courage to step forward. And then after stepping forward, realizing that sometimes, despite everyone's progression forward, despite the desire to get to the pinnacle and to be the ultimate leader, sometimes to have the greatest impact, it requires taking a step back. It requires shifting over to open yourself up to gain a greater, more broad audience that will follow you. And through that, you can grow into a higher level. Some people enjoy simply being at that level. It's not necessary for them to get to the top, to have the soapbox. Because oftentimes what we've seen is when getting to the top, that perspective is lost. They are blinded by the success, blinded by the power. And so if you are fortunate enough to either be in a leadership position, to be at the top, either currently or potentially, it is imperative that you have individuals that are willing to remind you and to set up a communication circle of trust that they will tell you when you have lost focus, when you have lost sight of the penultimate goal. And if you can do that, it doesn't matter where you lie, when you start, what your methods even are. you'll be able to be an influencer. You'll be able to have an impact regardless of the level you stand. I want to thank you all for listening in today. Please check out the website at pausethinkconsider.com/influencer. And don't forget to go on to the website. Check out each post. We have a specific question for each episode. Please comment, engage, let us know your thoughts. And I look forward to talking to you all next week on Pause, Think, Consider.